I've been a super fan of Elon my entire life. I think he's one of the strongest forces for good, honestly.
I agree with you.
On the planet right now. But one of my biggest fears is that he's secretly evil and like super profit motivated. But think about how catastrophic that would be if Elon was actually like behind closed doors, like evil. That would, I mean,
first of all, great movie, but also I don't think that's true. I mean, I know Elon.
It's possible with all the data, with the Neuralink, with all of that stuff. I'm just saying there could be a different side of the token. I don't believe so, but it would be catastrophic.
Amazing twist ending to this movie. But
I love Elon.
Yeah.
I really, really do. You've spent a lot of time with him recently. What's something about Elon that surprised you?
Elon. So the thing about Elon, I think you do see this publicly. He does have a sort of childlike sense of wonder about the world, which I think amounts to the drive for innovation. He approaches the world with a sense of like, what can humans do? And that's so inspiring and so cool. I mean, how can you watch what he's doing with SpaceX and just not be inspired at how awesome humans are? How cool that is. Right? And Elon brings that sense of optimism to many of the things that he's doing. Right? Now, sometimes that manifests politically because, again, it's sort of like this almost naive enthusiasm about things. Sometimes it manifests in strange ways that are sort of disquieting. But I think that overall, the kind of perception of what can we do if we put our minds to it is so cool, and we don't see that nearly enough. And so that's the thing. Like when I went with him to Auschwitz, and we had this we had a conversation for about an hour, and then we had another conversation on camera for about an hour, and behind closed doors, we were having a conversation about sort of the nature of humanity. And he was saying, he was saying, I think humans are inherently good. And I said, well, I actually don't. I mean, we just went to Auschwitz. Like, it's very difficult for me to say that human beings are inherently good. I think that human beings have an innate capacity for good, but I think human beings also have an innate capacity for evil. And he like took it in. And he was kind of thinking about it, and it was interesting to just kind of watch him process. And I think that he comes at things with a uniquely open mind, which also means that some bad ideas get in there, but a lot of really good ideas come out of that. Because to look at things with fresh eyes, well, one of the things he said, we were talking about the Cybertrucks. My son is an enormous Elon fan, like he's 8 years old, loves Elon, loves SpaceX, loves Tesla, like super into it. And since the time he was 3, Tesla was like his company. And my son started like a little golf ball business where we lived near a golf course. So he picked up like all the used golf balls, we resold them, and he made like $400 or $500. He's like, well, what should I do with this? And I was like, you should buy some stock. He's like, how much is Tesla stock? Right? That's so my son does. So he I was telling Elon, like, my son loves the Cybertruck. And he's like, well, of course he loves this. I made the Cybertruck for 6-year-old kids to think it's cool.
It's an awful impression.
Which, like, it's a terrible impression, but like that approach, which is like, what if I just make cool shit that people like? That's awesome. That's really cool. And it's uniquely, it's refreshing and neat. I love that about Elon. I really love it.
Me too. And I think what he did with X was like massive what he did with X. So a lot of respect to Elon.
What do you think his role in the government would be? Because he's very pro getting rid of some of the national debt and cutting by $2 trillion. Do you think that's feasible? And what would his involvement be?
Well, discretionary spending, very difficult to reduce that by $2 trillion. You're talking about, deep cuts to services. It's not just a matter of efficiency. It's a matter of which services are in play. You can't cut, spending without there being another side of the coin, which is the things that the spending was paying for, even if you're overspending. So I think that just in terms of efficiency, Elon, the way that he runs companies is, I mean, you can see it with X. He comes in, he's like, I'm just going to fire everyone. Like, if I can't see what you're doing right now, you are fired. And he took down the number of employees at X by like 80%. He went from a huge number of employees to a tiny number of employees, and then sort of bootstrapped it until it worked again, which you can do in private industry. Much harder to do when you have public sector unions. Much more difficult to do when there are regulatory agencies that you're sitting on. So I think that he can make a difference in terms of allocation of contracts, negotiation of contracts, getting rid of some of the wasteful spending. The reality is that the thing that's bankrupting the country is typically not sort of these discretionary programs. It is the embedded entitlement programs and discretionary and sort of means-tested welfare programs that are discretionary under the budget that are eating up the entire budget of the country, and those are bigger problems for the American body politic than just Elon sitting there with a red pen.
How do you solve that? Or is it solvable? Can you solve the national debt?
I think not. I think that the high likelihood is that the United States runs directly into austerity measures in about 10 years. Human beings very, very good at very, very bad at prevention and very, very good at adaptation, just generally speaking. And so we can see the problem coming, and ain't nobody stopping that problem. I mean, this has been one of my big critiques of the Republican Party under basically since Paul Ryan left the scene. A lot of people hate Paul Ryan. Yeah, the thing that Paul Ryan said that was right is that the entitlement programs are bankrupting us. They clearly are. And when he suggested changing them, the American people were like, hey, hold up there a minute, buddy. Now, what's amazing is if you reverse the clock, go back to 2005, George W. Bush was proposing that we privatize Social Security. And by privatize Social Security, he didn't mean that Social Security go away. He meant that we will take your money that you're paying into Social Security and we'll put it into an index fund. And then it will pay you back when you retire. Can you imagine how much money people would have made if they had done that in 2005? If they took your Social Security, where was the stock market? Where was the Dow Jones in like 2005? I promise you it wasn't at 40,000. Okay, so if they had taken and put into an index fund, like George W. Bush was
individual
correct.
accounts.
Yes, individual accounts, individual savings accounts, right? They put it into an individual savings, they leave it there, and you just leave it there. You can't even access it, right? You're not going to sell it because we don't want you to sell it because we're afraid if you sell it, you're going to be dumb about your stocks. Fine. So you just leave it there for like 40, 50 years. Okay, they do for you what you're talking about to coffee, which was George W. Bush's actual proposal. He was ripped up and down. People like, no, you're going to steal our Social Security and destroy it. And all. Like, in the end, this is a democratic republic, and that means that if people are too dumb to understand how economics works, then I guess we'll all pay the price when the austerity measures come and we have to radically increase inflation, radically increase our taxes, or radically decrease the benefits, because those are the only three choices.
I did the math on this, and if you invested in an index fund over 40 years, instead of Social Security, you'll have 3 times more money.
Yes.
And it will be able to be passed on to other generations. The downside of that, the other part, is that with Social Security, they buy U.S. Treasuries. And so without that influx of capital, which is a big part of who's buying U.S. Treasuries, the government might have a harder time running and funding itself.
Good. That sounds like a feature, not a bug to me. I mean, I prefer that we buy fewer U.S. Treasuries and stop funding so many terrible government programs. I think that sounds great to me. That sounds like more monetary stability. Okay.
So why don't they do privatized accounts? Because it would make sense to me if it was like, a target date index fund that just balances over time. And by the time you hit 70, it's in mostly treasuries, maybe 20% in equities, some regular income that's coming in, and you just receive 3% of that for the next 30 something years. And if you run out, you run out or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it makes perfect fiscal sense. But the problem is that the minute anyone politically says you're touching Social Security, everybody has a bias toward the status quo in American politics. This is how Obamacare goes from, I can't believe how terrible this is. Why is anybody touching my healthcare too? Why is anyone touching Obamacare? This is terrible. Why is everyone touching my healthcare? Whatever the status quo is, people are very, very nervous about messing with the status quo. Problem is sometimes the status quo is fiscally unsustainable over the long term.
Yeah, you got eviscerated for talking about retirement and Social Security earlier.
Yeah, it was good times, yeah.
I remember that distinctly because I watched that episode when it came out, and then to my surprise, I actually didn't expect that sort of revolt to happen.
Well, I mean, again, you stepped on the third rail. The third rail is Social Security is owed to you, that retirement should be the goal of life. And when I said retirement, I wasn't talking about right. I mean, if you're broken down, that's a different thing. And I wasn't even talking about retirement in the sense that you retire and then you take a part-time job teaching or you go work at your church. I was talking about sort of the vision that I think a lot of Americans have about retirement, which is at 65, you go sit on a beach somewhere for 30 years. I don't think that's good for human beings. I think that you have to have a
data,
purpose.
it's not.
Right.
Which is kind of what you were referencing.
That was what I was referencing. And then, of course, the way that our politics works is that all gets telescoped down into a headline, which I want everybody to work until they die, which is no. I mean, I would like you to do something meaningful in your life until you die. That seems like a pretty good thing to do. And meaningful doesn't have to mean working for a wage. It can very often mean that you worked at a backbreaking job, and now what you want to do is you want to work, for your church community. You want to go do politics. You want to go and write your book. You have to find some sense of purpose and meaning. And what you're seeing, I think, is, and you can see this in the data, is enormous amounts of rising depression among older Americans, actually, and that's a huge problem.